Welcome again to T. Lauren Council. I am your host and reader, Tamurel. I'm reading to you a continuation of Huntress by L.J. Smith about a vampire who is half vampire, stalks her own kind to protect humans in Huntress. So let's continue with the story. Chapter 4. Rule number 1 of living with humans. Always wash the blood off before coming in the house. Jazz stood at the outdoor faucet, icy cold water splashing over her hands. She was scrubbing, carefully, a long, slim dagger made of splint bamboo, with a cutting edge as sharp as glass. When it was clean, she slipped it into her right knee-high boot. Then she dubbed water over several stains on her t-shirt and jeans and scrubbed them with a fingernail. Finally, she whipped out a pocket mirror and examined her face critically. The girl who looked back didn't much resemble the wild, laughing Huntress who had leaped from tree to tree in Moyer Woods. Oh, the features were the same, the height of cheekbone, the curve of chin. They had even fined out a bit because she was a year older. The red flag of her hair was the same too, although now it was pulled back in an attempt to tame its fiery disorder. The difference was in the expression, which was sadder and wiser than Jazz had ever imagined she could be, and in the eyes. The eyes weren't as silvery as they had been, not as dangerously beautiful, but that was only to be expected. She had discovered that she didn't need to drink blood as long as she didn't use her vampire powers. Human food kept her alive and made her look more human. One other thing about the eyes, they were scarily vulnerable even to Jazz. No matter how she tried to make them hard and menacing, they had the wounded look of a deer that knows it's going to die and accepts it. Sometimes she wondered if that was an omen. Well, no blood on her face. She shoved the mirror back in her pocket. She was most presentable, if extremely late for dinner. She turned the faucet off and headed for the back door of the low, sweeping ranch house. Everyone looked up as she came in. The family was in the kitchen, eating at the oak table with the white trim, under the bright fluorescent light. The TV was blaring cheerfully from the family room. Uncle Jim, her mother's brother, was munching tacos and leafing through the mail. He had red hair darker than Jazz and a long face that looked almost as Medieval as Jazz's mother's had. He was usually off in a gentle, worried dream somewhere. Now he waved an envelope at Jazz and gazed at her reproachfully, but he couldn't say anything because his mouth was full. Aunt Nanami was on the phone, drinking a Diet Coke. She was small, with dark shining hair and eyes that turned to crescents when she smiled. She opened her mouth and frowned at Jazz, but couldn't say anything either. Ricky, who was 10, had carroty hair and expressive eyebrows. He gave Jazz a big smile that showed chewed up taco in his mouth and said, "Hi." Jazz smiled back. No matter what she did, Ricky was there for her. Claire, who was Jazz's age, was sitting primely, eating bits of taco with her fork. She looked like a smaller version of Aunt Nan, but with a very sour expression. "Where have you been?" she said. "We waited dinner almost an hour for you, and you never even called." "Sorry," Jazz said, looking at all of them. It was such an incredibly normal family scene, so completely typical, and it struck her to the heart. It was over a year since she had walked out of the night world to find these people, her mother's relatives. It was 11 and a half months since Uncle Jim had taken her in, not knowing anything about her except that she was his orphaned niece and that her father's family couldn't handle her anymore and had given up on her. All these months, she had lived with the Goddard family, and she still didn't fit in. She could look human, she could act human, but she couldn't be human. Just as Uncle Jim swallowed and got his mouth clear to speak to her, she said, "I'm not hungry. I think I'll just go do my homework." Uncle Jim called, "Wait a minute," after her, but it was Claire who slammed down her napkin and actually followed Jazz through the hall to the other side of the house. "What do you mean, sorry? You do this every day. You're always disappearing. Half the time you stay out until after midnight, and then you don't even have an explanation." "Yeah, I know, Claire," Jess answered without looking back. "I'll try to do better. You say that every time, and every time is exactly the same. Don't you realize that my parents worry about you? Don't you even care?" "Yes, I care, Claire." "You don't act like it. You act like rules don't apply to you. And you say sorry, but you're just going to do it again." Jess had to keep herself from turning around and snapping at her cousin. She, like everyone else in the family but Claire, was a royal pain. Worse, she was a shrewd royal pain, and she was right. Jess was going to do it again, and there was no way she could explain. The thing was, vampire hunters have to keep weird hours. When you're on the trail of a vampire and shapeshifter killing team, as Jazz had been this evening, chasing them through the slums of Oakland, trying to get them cornered in some crack house where there aren't little kids to get hurt. You don't think about missing dinner. You don't stop in the middle of staking the undead to phone home. Maybe I shouldn't have become a vampire hunter, Jazz thought. But it's a little late to change now, and somebody's got to protect these innocent humans from the night world. Oh well. She reached the door of her bedroom. Instead of yelling at her cousin, she simply half turned and said, "Why don't you go work on your web page, Claire?" Then she opened the door and glanced inside and froze. Her room, which had left in military neatness, was a shambles. The window was wide open, papers and clothes were scattered across the floor, and there was a very large ghoul standing at the foot of the bed. The ghoul opened its mouth menacingly at Jazz. "Oh, very funny," Claire was saying right behind her. "Maybe I should help you with your homework. I hear you're not doing so great in chemistry." Jazz moved fast, stepping nimbly inside the door and slamming it in Claire's face, pressing the little knob in the handle to lock it. "Hey!" Now Claire sounded really mad. "That's rude!" Sorry, Claire," Jazz faced the ghoul. What was it doing here? If it had followed her home, she was in bad trouble. That meant the night world knew where she was. "You know, Claire, I think I really need to be alone for a little while. I can't talk and do my homework." She took a step toward the creature, watching its reaction. Ghouls were semi-vampires. They were what happened to a human who was bled out but didn't get quite enough vampire blood in exchange to become a true vampire. They were undead but rotting. They had very little mind and only one idea in the world, to drink blood, which they usually did by eating as much of a human body as possible. They liked hearts. This ghoul was a new one, about 2 weeks dead. It was male and looked as if it had been a bodybuilder, although by now it wasn't so much buff as puffed. Its body was swollen with the gas of decomposition. Its tongue and eyes were protruding. Its cheeks was chickmunk-like, and bloody fluid was leaking from its nose. And of course, it didn't smell good. As Jazz edged closer, she suddenly realized that the ghoul wasn't alone. She could now see around the foot of the bed, and there was a boy lying on the carpet, apparently unconscious. The boy had light hair and rumpled clothes, but Jazz couldn't see his face. The ghoul was stooping over him, reaching for him with a sausage-shaped fingers. "I don't think so," Jess told it softly. She could feel a dangerous smile settling on her face. She reached into her right boot and pulled out the dagger. "What did you say?" Claire shouted from the other side of the door. "Nothing, Claire. Just getting out my homework." Jess jumped onto the bed. The ghoul was very big. She needed all the height she could get. The ghoul turned to face her, its lackluster bug eyes on the dagger. It made a little hissing sound around its swollen tongue. Fortunately, that was all the noise it could make. Claire was rattling the door. Did you lock this? What are you doing in there? Just studying, Claire. Go away. Jazz snapped a foot toward the goal, catching it under the chin. She needed to stun it and stake it fast. Goals weren't smart, but like the Energizer Bunny, they kept going and going. This one could eat the entire Goddard family tonight and still be hungry at dawn. The goal hit the wall opposite the bed. Jazz jumped down, putting herself between it and the boy on the floor. What was that noise? Claire yelled. I dropped the book. The goal swung. Jazz ducked. There were giant blisters on its arm, the brownish color of old blood. It rushed her, trying to slam her against the chest of drawers. Jazz flung herself backward, but she didn't have much room to maneuver. It caught her in the stomach with an elbow, a jarring blow. Jazz wouldn't let herself double over. She twisted and helped the goal in the direction it was already going, giving it impetus with her foot. It smacked into the window seat, face down. What is going on in there? Just looking for something. Jazz moved before the goal could recover, jumping to straddle its legs. She grabbed its hair. Not a good idea. It came off in clumps in her hand. Kneeling on it to keep it still, she raised the slim bamboo knife high and brought it down hard. There was a puncturing sound and a terrible smell. The knife had penetrated just under the shoulder blade, 6 inches into the heart. The goal convulsed once and stopped moving. Claire's voice came piercingly from behind the closed door. Mom, she's doing something in there. Then Aunt Nan's voice. Jazz, are you all right? Jazz stood, pulling her bamboo dagger out, wiping it on the goal's shirt. I'm just having a little trouble finding a ruler. The goal was in a perfect position. She put her arms around its waist, ignoring the feeling of skin slipping loose under her fingers, and heaved it up onto the window seat. There weren't many human girls who could have picked up almost 200 pounds of dead weight, and even Jazz ended up a little breathless. She gave the goal a shove, rolling it over until it reached the open window. Then she stuffed and maneuvered it out. It fell heavily into a bed of impatience, squashing the flowers. Good. She hauled it away later tonight and disposed of it. Jazz caught her breath, brushed off her hands and closed the window. She drew the curtain shut, then turned. The fair-haired boy was laying perfectly still. Jazz touched his back gently, saw that he was breathing. The door rattled and Claire's voice rose hysterically. Mom, do you smell that smell? Aunt Nan called. Jazz? Coming. Jazz glanced around the room. She needed something. There, the bed. Grabbing a handful of material near the head of the bed, she flipped comforter blankets and sheets over so they trailed off the foot, completely covering the boy. She tossed a couple of pillows on top of the pile for good measure, then grabbed a ruler off the desk. Then she opened the door, leaned against the door frame casually, and summoned her brightest smile. Sorry about that, she said. What can I do for you? Claire and Aunt Nan just stared at her. Claire looked like a rumpled, angry kitten. The fine dark hair that framed her face was ruffled. She was breathing hard, and her almond-shaped eyes were flashing sparks. Aunt Nan looked more worried and dismayed. Are you okay? She said, leaning in slightly to try and get a look at Jazz's room. We heard a lot of noise, and you'd have heard more earlier if you hadn't been watching TV. I'm fine. I'm great. You know how it is when you can't find something. Jazz lifted the ruler. Then she stepped back and opened the door farther. Aunt Nan's eyes widened as she took in the mess. Jazz, this does not happen when you can't find a ruler. This looks like Claire's room. Claire made a choked sound of indignation. It does not. My room's never been this bad. And what's that smell? She slipped by Aunt Nan and advanced on Jazz, who sidestepped to keep her from getting to the pile of blankets. Claire stopped dead anyway, her face wrinkling. She put a hand to cover her nose and mouth. It's you, she said, pointing at Jazz. You smell like that. Sorry. It was true. What with all the contact she had with the gold and the dirty knife in her boot, she was pretty ripped. I think I stepped in something on the way home. I didn't smell anything when you came in, Claire said suspiciously. And that's another thing. Aunt Nan said. She had been glancing around the room, but there was nothing suspicious